Hey, what's going on, guys? So today I want to talk a little bit about Lightroom. Now, first things first, for editing photos on a more professional level, it's important that we shoot in RAW. The more information we have, the more fine-tuning we can do. It's better to get everything as correct in camera as you can. Let's get started here. Some people prefer Lightroom Classic, and I think it's important to be familiar with both. We're just starting out. I believe this version is a little more user-friendly. So this is the program that I'm gonna go with. When you're doing the lens corrections and the geometry, and you're doing kind of the same batch of photos, it's cool to get that foundation going, and you can actually create like a preset and apply that to all your pictures and save you a little bit of time that way. So I'm just gonna go first down to geometry. Now if it's an image that you used, like the leading lines, like you have some nice like railings that's leading into your subject and you want to level those out, there's this tool here that will help straighten an image, but a lot of the times auto will get you to where you need to go. This is a portrait with just me and a blurred background, so it's not really necessary, but I did want to go over it for you guys. Now that we went over the geometry a little bit, the next thing that I usually do would be the little optics tab. Chromatic Aberration, I don't really need it. Enable lens corrections, I like to do it. I know that this was shot on my young Nuo 35mm. This is an older image. 50, no, it's 35mm, and you can see very minuscule adjustments it makes at the top. There can be a little bit of distortion going on up top there. Defringing I don't really mess with. If you zoom in, you can see some fringing sometimes, but it really depends on the subject you're shooting and the light situation there. So after I've made those base edits, I can save a preset. If you go up to presets, click here and you hit create a preset, and then you just want to go over and select, we've only messed with the optics and the geometry, so you would just say base preset for really whichever lens you're using. So in this case, young Nuo, geez, I can't type today, 35mm, and that'd be it. I don't personally need that preset, so I'm not gonna make it, but that is an option that can save you some time down the road if you're gonna be taking, like if you do real estate, and you always want your verticals auto corrected or whatever, that you can do that. That's another example. The next thing we want to do, or that I like to do, is I like to get the white balance. I like to get it where I like it. I won't always say correct. The correct white balance is almost subjective. You obviously want white to be white, but there's different shades of white. So whatever you think is gonna look the best for you. I think that's okay right there. Now that we have done the corrections with the white balance and the optics, this is where I'd like to go over to the light tab and actually screw around with the exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, etc. And like I said, I try and get everything, you know, as dialed in camera as I can. A lot of these corrections will be pretty minuscule. If I want like a little bit moodier, maybe I'll have it a little bit darker, or if I want to blow out the sky, I can do that too, but I'm not going to do that. So I like things to look generally natural, and I think for this edit, before getting too creative, I want to just get the colors looking good. And I'm going to bring up the contrast just a little bit. You really don't want to overdo it because it starts to look almost plasticky or fake, or however you would describe that. I don't like it. It's not a good look. So don't overdo the contrast. Highlights highlights are actually just about pretty good where they're at. I'm not really worried about the blown out sky. I was more exposing for the subject, or I guess in this case myself. I was more worried about, you know, getting that in focus and having a good spot to work with. Shadows, let's see. I mean, shadows are pretty good. I like the blacks to be black. So I like to have the darker shadows, and that'll give me my blacks there. Whites are pretty on par. This will make it, I guess, like pop a little bit on, if you can see right over here is where the light's hitting my face, so we put a little bit more whites in there. So now that we've gone through the light tab, what I kind of do at this point, this is where you need to decide, is this something I'm going to edit to look more professional, you know, something you'd find in a magazine, or something you provide like a client with, or is this where you want to go more creative? Maybe this is for your Instagram or your portfolio or whatever, because this is where the photo is for the most part corrected. Moving on, I want to look at the effects tab. Some people don't even like touching this at all. Some people like touching this too much. Texture, clarity, people say don't overdo it. And it really depends on what you're trying to do, because texture, the more that you add texture and clarity together, it just makes the photo really busy. So typically these are more of a tool that you want to make micro adjustments for. And for, say if you're doing some sort of fashion or something, you might actually want to dial it back a little bit. If you can see what it's doing to the cheeks. And if you want to get even more in depth with that, you can go over here and go to the little brush tool, and if there are certain areas that you want to soften up or whatever, that's where you do that. So for this though, we're just gonna keep it simple and do an overall clarity slider over the whole thing here. And there's nothing I'm really trying to emphasize, so that I don't need to really dial it up too much. If you don't have any in there at all, then it almost looks like completely fake. It almost looks like a rendering. Like that could be a 3D model of me or something. That just doesn't look right. I typically don't really screw around with that a whole lot. Dehaze is cool. If you like to actually flatten out your pictures a little bit, if you like a more muted look, you can mess around with dehaze and then go back up and adjust the exposure for it. And that's a good way to actually mute out your photo if you want like a little bit more of a dark, moody sort of vibe. Vignette you can actually use as a tool to get rid of it, which seems a little weird, but some lenses that you use, if there's a natural vignette, the vignette tool can actually fix that. So if you can see, I'm making the adjustments forwards and that lightens it up, whereas if I go the other way, it darkens it. But some photos will start out, you know, in this darker area here, because they have a lens hood on it and it's a super wide angle lens or a fisheye lens or something like that. that can happen. So you can actually use that tool to lighten it up and actually fix the edges of your photo, which is pretty nice. Grain you can get a lot of naturally if you're shooting in low light situations. It's typically not something I go for, so I try to avoid the noise, and the grain is just, that's forced noise on the photo, and I don't want to do that. For the detail tab, we go through and we can do sharpening in post, but I'm content with where it's at. I don't want to screw around with that. And also, let's look at see the bokeh over here. If we go too hard, you can actually see these weird patterns start to happen, and it just it doesn't look good. And the more that I feel like the more that you alter it, the more like anomalies kind of come up. Like this is, I don't know if my screen can capture it, but you can see all these little waves in the bokeh and stuff like that. I like what my camera does on its own. I am totally content with this here. So as you can see, now that I've put this back, those waves are gone. And it can be a really good tool, but if you dial your focus in camera, you get your focus right and everything, it's not always necessary to mess around with. At this point, if you like the way that this picture turned out, we didn't do any brush strokes or gradients or anything like that, so this is a good point. If you like the way that it turned out, this is where you should be creating your preset. Essentially, we've made all of the color correcting we want to do. We've made all of the light correcting that we want to do. You still want to go in and you want to put those final touches on. But since we haven't used the gradients, or we haven't used the brushes yet, or the spot healing or anything like that, this is the perfect point that we should be saving our preset. All of those other tools are stuff that we use per image. And just for the sake of showing you guys, I do want to go over the tools briefly here. So I'm going to start with the spot healing tool. You can scroll up or down to change the size of it. If you have maybe a teenage boy with a lot of acne, then you can, go over a pimple or something, and then you pick another nice localized spot, and that's all there is to it. You want to kind of try and match the skin tones. You might not be able to see it zoomed out, but yeah, that's a good spot right there. You're not going to be able to see it zoomed out for the most part if you keep it small like this, but you should still, it's good practice to try and keep the texture and the light in the spot close to perfect. Alright guys, so the brush tool is absolutely awesome because we can do everything that we just did but in one spot. So we can go even more in depth with our edits. So if we want to, let's say we want to get rid of these blown out skies here and we want to maybe make it a little bit darker. I just brushed over that real quick just as an example, and we can lower the exposure. And now that doesn't look so blown out. Obviously it's pretty blown out, but for example purposes, we can even make it look, we warm it up, make it look like maybe the sun's peeking through a little bit. And you're really just screwing with the overexposed light up here. But that's just, one example. Maybe we want to make the shoulders of my shirt a little bit darker. So we'll go ahead and start a new brush, and we'll just kind of go over here. And I'm gonna make the whole shirt darker here, just to get rid of that blue coloring that we did earlier. You can do practically anything with this thing. I mean, my gauges, I could, if I wanted to, let's add a brush. Let's bring that back and that back. Add brush, go over my gauges here. And let's see, maybe I wanna, here we go. Let's just adjust the color of them just for fun. And maybe put it on a little bit heavier there. Yeah. Perfect. Now they're the hot pink. Maybe we can take a little bit of contrast out of that. Yeah, just for screwing around, but you know, you get the point. At this point, you're an artist. You're just doing a whole lot of painting on the canvas at that point. Lastly, I just want to go over this gradient tool real quick. It's pretty much like the brush, but in the form of a gradient. So we can change the white balance only on one part of the gradient. We can do the same with the exposure. Maybe we want it to be darker on one part of the image. This is great for you know, bringing in the focus on something. Gradients are great for all sorts of things, man. I mean, you can go, I have the exposure all the way down so you can actually see what's going on here. But if I move this down a little bit, I'll bring that exposure back to normal. And I have the temp up. So that looks even more like the sun is coming down. So that's just another tool you can mess with. Get creative with it, because there's no right or wrong way to use gradients. Gradients are a tool to help you be more creative with your photos. So lastly, we have the radial gradient. It's pretty much the same thing. It's just a circle instead of the lines. So there's that for you. Last thing we need to do is head over to File, Export. And then you can export as a couple different settings. If you're doing a finished product, I recommend JPEG. Quality, I usually do 100. It's a bigger file size, but I like to have the bigger image. So that's just my personal preference. I hope you guys got something useful out of this. I do want to make another video of going more in depth, but I think for everything that we learned today, there's no reason that you wouldn't be able to get a more professional looking photo out of Lightroom. If there is anything you would like me to cover more in depth, I'm more than happy to answer questions down in the comments. In the meantime, if you did get something out of this, please like and subscribe to the channel. There's definitely more to come. I got more planned for you guys. If you're doing this for fun and you just want a professional looking image and this is gonna go on your Instagram or in your portfolio or something, this is totally fine. This is more than fine. This is gonna take things to the next step for you guys. So thanks again so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.